Okay, let's kick off the tri-board meeting for June, and we'll start off with the Pledge of Allegiance. Mr. Frano's going to lead us again.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
You know what? I'm going to give you guys this much just in case, because it is, even though it's not a WebEx, it is on. They won't hear you, yeah. So if you need it, so again, our second tri-board meeting of the year, and we have one planned for September and one again for December. And last time we talked, we had 3 or 4 subjects on. One was the cannabis law, which we have the we're opening the public hearing tonight on at our regular meeting. So we'll see what kind of feedback we have on that. We talked about short-term rentals, and we now have a draft. And we talked about some other zoning things, but we didn't do any action. It was more of a discussion. And kind of these meetings are for all 3 boards to have that open discussion. So it's nothing that we say in here is inked in, it's not like, hey, somebody says something and we're gonna go right out and do it, right? It's stuff we're discussing across the 3 boards, and I just think it's a good way to communicate, and we'll keep doing it. So what we gave you tonight is there's a draft of the proposed, I'm gonna say, it's not totally proposed yet, it's a draft of a law we wanna put in place for short-term rentals. And when I'm talking short-term rentals, we're talking about Airbnb, VRBOs, et cetera, and we do get a lot of complaints on it. Okay, people will call up and say, hey, I saw 10 cars in my parking lot yesterday. There's only a 2-bedroom house, and there's music on the deck. There's weddings being held there. It's like not really an event center, et cetera, right? So what we did was, I know myself, Dave, and some others in here, we went out and researched a bunch of laws. We took one that was actually from the town of Rochester, and we started modifying it with some stuff we heard from other towns, from stuff we had talked about, some input we got from the team. And I know we have another set of input I think Bill Meltzer set forward, and we should talk about that tonight, which is what I want to do. But I don't know if any of you have had a chance to actually read through this at all yet. But I guess I'd like to hear your input on what you've been hearing about short-term rentals, what your thoughts are. I also passed out, it was kind of timely this morning in the Kingston-Freeman, Rhinebeck has been discussing a lot, and when I read what they were trying to do, seemed way more restrictive than I think we would want to do, but I gave it to you for your knowledge, just so you see what they were looking at, because it's always good to get input. And I know anytime I've worked with zoning code, I've gone and read as much as I could from other towns and then went from there. So first, I guess I'll ask if anybody has any input on short-term rentals, or if anybody wants to do any particular discussion. Yeah, Russ?
On your proposal here, number C on the zoning issue, I would like to suggest that R1 quarters and R1 halves not be allowed to have a transient rental. Now, I'll state my reason why. I live in a neighborhood that's mostly R1 quarters and R1 halves. Most of them have a driveway that can hold 2 or 3 cars. And I actually had on Christopher Avenue, we had a house that was empty for a while. People bought it, and they did some work on it, and they actually made it one of these, transient party houses. And every Friday, there would be, 8 or 9 cars parked in the road, all over the yard, as best they could. And I would say probably on Sunday afternoon, there would be an incredible amount of garbage that would sit out on the road until the garbage companies came around the following day. So it was a problem. And the people across the street told me that the noise was just, all night, all weekend.
Yeah, and that's normally the kind of complaints we get, yeah.
It's just too small a property, maybe you should have at least an acre or 2 to do
Yeah,
this.
or maybe it depends on kind of the neighborhood too. I mean, maybe there's the neighborhood, the type of dwelling, I don't know, it's good input. I mean, that's what we're looking for, so, it's good input. So, anybody else have a thought on that, or?
Well, to comment on what Russ is saying, maybe it's not an all or nothing thing, maybe you just restrict
Right.
a little bit more, you know what I mean? Because to say, oh, no, none here, but you can do whatever you want, but maybe there's a middle ground where you just maybe put some restrictions on it.
Yeah, see, that, and that's where I was thinking, that's where we were thinking when we wrote the cell, because it's, so if you know, and part of it, and Dave and I were talking about this earlier, part of the process is going to be to come in front of the planning board for a special use permit.
Right.
So if they're coming to you with a special use permit and you see a situation that exists, kind of like Russ says, where they only have two, and then if you, two parking spots, and they want to tell you in their permit, they have 6 bedrooms, then that's a problem, right? So maybe, I think, Sal, that's kind of what you're saying?
Exactly what I'm saying, yeah.
Okay,
Right.
Like that.
good, no, I think that's
Yeah.
good input.
The permit that I have for my property upstate in Lake Placid, they have a lot of requirements, very restrictive, but you have to give them a site plan. Here's how many parking spaces I have, and that should be part of the process. And if, they would accept the hand-drawn map, but showing you have adequate parking and keeping cars off the street and in your driveway.
So you said hand-drawn, so it's not a.
Yeah, it's not an
stance, okay,
engineered.
Because that's
you know,
why I don't know, I don't want to go that far, but I got you.
Right.
Okay.
Also, to Russ's point, as far as the garbage being out, we should have a location already for where the garbage is to be stored, and at least have some restrictions to the
Right.
owner of the property
Right.
to make sure there is no garbage left outside after the people.
I agree, and I think if you read through that, it is in here. If you read, yeah, I think both of them are. So I kind of agree, I think, with Sal on this, is that instead of restricting it by zoning district, to restrict it by items that we care about, right?
And on an individual basis to a degree.
Yes, and agree. And I think it's also in here, and you guys can read it a little more, is if they violate that or have so many violations, they won't get another permit. You can revoke it. So it's revocable, and it'll stay on record, so if they come back. So I don't know if y'all say anything.
Yeah, I do. To speak to Sal's point, which I think is right on, and hopefully to address some of Russ's concerns, if you look at page 5 of the document that you have, it says the initial permit shall include the following: its contact information, the owner, whether it's owner occupied or non-occupied, whether it's rented whole or in part, the hosting platform. We want to know everywhere they want to, put up their ads for it. Parking is one of the issues. Maximum occupancy is probably going to be driven partly, and Sal can help us with this, by number of bedrooms and number of parking spots. Because I've been to places where pretty much every goddamn room in the building is considered a sleeping unit.
Right.
Go down to Outer Banks and there are 12 bedrooms in a house, and you look at them and they go, this ain't a bedroom, but people sleep in them. So the planning board would have the power to kind of sort of lock that up a little bit. Water septic, fire safety, is part of this is all part of the application for the planning board to review. The description, which talks about occupancy of each bedroom and sleeping rooms, ingress, egress, the plat. We did steal this from our town of Rochester, and I don't want to go. I'm just going to go through this quick, but this document is asking for an aerial view, which you can go to Google Maps and print out. Right, so your hand-drawn map might be sufficient. To that earlier comment about garbage removal, that's built in here. The house rules are required, and I put in a bunch of stuff in the back. Town of Rochester had some. We added a couple, including a pool piece of the puzzle, and then the jurisdiction. If you don't live close, you have to designate a property manager, a local manager. And then they have to give us the County Commissioner of Finance certificate for the hotel tax. So that'll all be part of the application that will come to the planning board for special use, and then the planning board would do what it does to sort of regulate it.
Yeah, and I think the thing, I wasn't sold initially on the special use permit, but I think the more I was talking about, I think it handles some of the things Russ was talking about, and some of the, you don't want to be over restrictive, but if you have to get a special use permit, that means you have a public hearing. So like if somebody next to you was gonna open one, you'd get a notice say, do you know that this is going on? And you would get to come and talk about it, and you could, and what's good about that, I think, is some cases, people have already been renting it, and you'll have already seen some of the behaviors there, right? So I think it's an important part. Hi, Joe.
Hey, what's going on?
Good.
Sorry, I'm late. I just got
So I just have one question in my sheets. On the bottom of that page 6, that I was just reading from, the application review, it calls for a notice of 500 feet. 500 feet is an awful long way.
Right.
We typically don't do that for planning boards, special use permit. Usually it's 150 to 300, depending on the size of the project. So I was hoping to get the three boards input as to whether you agree with 500 feet, less, more, whatever.
What's your thoughts on that, guys? Joe, we're talking about the short-term rental stuff, so we're getting some pretty good input so far. And I don't know if they gave you a copy. Yeah, Dave will give you one.
Thanks, Dave, I appreciate that.
Yeah, you're right. 500 feet is a pretty good,
It's pretty long, yeah.
pretty far stretch.
I think 500 feet is adequate.
Dave, you thought it's too far, 500?
Yeah, so if
Why
you
do you
look,
think it's too far?
so if you look at like on the Pressure or Reservoir Road, that's a long road, but it's gonna be a lot of houses to notice. We have no problem doing that for the planning board, but the more you get, the more unwieldy it becomes. I have no, one way or the other, it makes no difference to me. 500 foot is the most we've ever done, and that was for, that was for Highland Square.
I think it should just be the immediate neighbor.
What about the special use permit notifications? What do you do there?
It depends on the size of the project, so usually special use permit's 150 feet.
If you're doing a special use permit, I would keep the same rules as special use permit.
Because
Here,
150
Carl's
feet,
comment.
If you think about it, if you're in the R quarter zone, you have 120-foot road frontage.
Right.
So you get that lot and the next one
And
over,
the next one over,
Yeah.
right?
who are probably the people who will be most impacted by
Yeah,
whatever. we're doing.
absolutely, absolutely. I think I wouldn't, if your special use permit calls for that now, and we're saying this is a special use permit, I would just keep that, I think, consistent.
It kind of mirrors the current building and zoning codes.
Yeah.
I mean, it's kind of redundant. I mean, maybe something for people that live on the premises or residents to go through all this bureaucracy. I could see out-of-towners that just buy up a bunch of houses and want to rent it as
Yep.
Airbnb. But for people who live here trying to pay their taxes and their bills and stuff, it might be a little much.
That's the thing that, you mentioned that, I wanted to talk about that, because that's what's concerning to me, is a bunch of people buying a bunch of houses. You know, it is me, and like, I wanna rent my house and go on vacation, I get it, but do we really want people buying up 10 or 12 houses on the street and making them big deals?
Isn't there a minimum on that already? Or a maximum, I should say? There should be a maximum. I know some of the other towns had maximum purchases.
Did I
So
saw-
an owner can only have one
Right.
in the town or something of that nature.
I did think I saw that did we put something in there, Dave?
It was in there, I saw,
I
but
think, I think Airbnb has even proposed some places where if you have a housing crisis or you have a housing shortage, then you should only have one permit per home or something like that.
Yeah. I think we have two built in.
We have two in here, yeah.
So like, I have, my apartment house has corporations, each one is its own corporation. But you wouldn't, Dave, you wouldn't know that it's my, I mean, you know, because you know me, it's my inspection, but if you didn't know me,
Right.
how would you know that?
We actually don't allow, the way it's written now, we don't allow corporations,
Okay.
no property owned by a corporation or other business entity may shall qualify for a permit, but by individual, sole proprietorship, general partnership, LLC, or LLP can, right? So, but the language here says you have to disclose the owners of your LLC or LLP during the permit application. Well, that could just be a question on the application, how many do you have, and if they lie in an application, now off they're done.
Do we, but wait a minute, do we make it owner op? They have to be owner op?
No.
No, I think that's too restrictive there too. So I see, and this is one I've gone back and forth, and I also kind of agree with Jerry on one point. You don't want to make it overly restricted. So, within the code, but I'm wondering, Dave, if this is something where, I guess you can't do it. I was trying to think if there's something where you can have an application or a checklist and not have to put it all in the code, or just, I don't know. No, you probably have to have it in the code, I think.
If you're gonna rent your house out, it's gotta meet all your building standards anyway.
The building standards, but I don't think like a good example, one that Dave and I ran into watching, we actually went to a webinar on this that Granicus hosted. And one of the things I hadn't thought about was some of the pool safety. So normally, for pool safety, you know, if you put a pool in, you know, there's code that you put a pool into, right? But when you rent it out, you know, somebody else is using your pool now. So how do you know that they are following the pool safety stuff, where, in other words, you know, I think we put in here that you actually have to have a pool alarm or a pool watcher person or something like that.
Wouldn't that be the same as a long-term rental?
In-ground pool, because I know I got it, by law, you have to
It's in
have,
the electrical code, yeah.
yeah, you have this
Building
thing
code.
goes to your pool, and it has a buzzer, and it shows if somebody falls in the pool, and it sends an alarm off.
It's a waiver.
And, but, you know, that brings me up, and I'm not trying to create work for anybody, but if today, the guy at work, you know, nonchalant, and his wife calls him, the microwave's on fire, and he's gonna, oh, I'll get there, and he goes to that house, and it makes me think that, you know, I have a fire inspection, Dave, what are fire inspections on apartments, every 2 years, or
Every 3 years,
every
3 years.
three, but I'm thinking, you know, and I'm gonna talk about me, and Dave, you know this, you go in the apartments, the smart smoke detectors are all ripped out, fire extinguishers are all gone. You know, because tenants just do that, it's making noise because they were cooking. And I'm thinking on Airbnb, you got so many transit people, maybe our inspections need to be every 6 months or every year.
What do we have in here?
1 year.
Once a year. We have
But once a year instead of once every 3 years.
About the length of permit, there's one section that I wrote up, rewrote up, that says it's biennial permit length, but the inspections are every year, and there's another section that says, and that's my fault, that says the permit is annually renewed. So the question for you guys is, do you want to see these people every 2 years to renew the permit and still do the inspection once a year, or 6 months, as Joe suggests? Or see them every year and do an inspection review?
Dave, do you think 6 months is overkill, or do you think it's?
No, I don't, because I agree with you, Joe. I've seen tenants do some crazy things with houses.
But can you handle it from a workload perspective?
No, I'm gonna need 2 more people.
Yeah, no, but I'm just saying, I understand the concern. I'm okay if you guys tell me we could do it every 6 months. I'm fine with the 1 year instead of the 3 year like we do normally.
And I think that it's contingent that if we make it 6 months, that your inspection has to be done, one of the 6 months has to be done before you renew. Because this way, it forces them to make sure that they get the renewal, not, hey, can't make it today, I'm out of town, you know, saying.
I mean, kind of the good thing about Airbnb is that every time you turn that apartment or house over, it gets inspected
Right.
by the owner or
Yep.
whoever's in charge of it.
Exactly.
And any kind of damage that's done to it
Right.
is gonna be noted, billed, and then fixed.
That's why I think a year is okay.
So I think, if anything, it'll fix that problem.
I agree.
Versus a long-term rental.
I agree. That's
Yeah.
why I'm okay with a year personally.
What about length of permit?
Length of permit?
I'd say 1 year.
1 year.
Well, it should be annual, yeah.
Because that would be based on whether or not there's any violations, and you could work that out right then and there. And any,
Now, on the renewal permit, do they have to do a, they don't have to come back, it's just renewal permit? Okay, that's what I thought. Yeah, I'm good with that.
And do
Yeah,
I have to be so let's say my neighbor wants to do an Airbnb, should I be notified?
Yes,
You will be.
that's what we were talking about.
But then-
That's why we did it as
That's
a
within
special
the
use
500
permit,
feet
Joe.
thing.
That way, special use permit, you have to have a public hearing.
Yeah, because I mean, me, I don't really care what my neighbors do. I like those.
Yes, you do.
I got senses of humor. But, you know, some people, you know, don't want rowdy parties going on next to their house.
Yeah, and the other one, and I think you had it in here, Dave, was, that's why it's important to see the house rules. Also, we put it in here, what are your house rules? Give us a copy of them. Because I know a lot of people will rent Airbnbs or VRBO, wherever they go, and have events there. And, you know, and like the one, I know, I think Anthony inspected one where the deck wouldn't hold more than 4 or 5 people, and they were planning to have a 100-person wedding there. You know, so I do think it's good to have some level. I don't want it to be over restrictive, because I do want people to be able to, you know, to make some revenue on it and some profit on the thing. That helps them pay their taxes, helps us all, right? So I don't want it to be overly restrictive, but at the same time, I don't want it to be open, you know, open kimono type of thing, right? So,
I have a quick question. What about the the accessory apartments that are above garages and stuff? Is there any way to separate the two?
did we put anything in on that, Dave?
No, the only separation we have is either the dwellings, rented, or the use is rented in whole or in part. So there is a section in here that if it's rented in part, it means that the owner lives in the primary, and there's an accessory apartment.
So accessory apartment would fall under that then,
You
I
could
would
rent an
think,
accessory apartment, sure.
Scott.
So would they still have to register it as?
Yeah, absolutely,
All right, just making sure
absolutely.
that was the
No,
connection.
absolutely. And the way, one of the things, and I may not have said this, Ulster County hired a company to search the internet for all these rentals. I think it's Granicus, right? And they have a database. Now, it's kind of funny, because I called Ulster County and said, can I get a copy of that? Because I want to see how many you found in Lloyd. And of course, I had to fill out a resolution. We had to do a resolution at our last meeting. I sent it back to the county, and in July, they'll do a resolution at the legislative meeting so that we can get the data. And so he said, as soon as that's done in July, we'll start getting the data on, you know, rentals, or not rental, Airbnbs, whatever database they search, we'll start getting that info of how many are in Lloyd. They did it because they want to collect, obviously, the tax on it, which, you know, is fair, because a hotel has to pay tax, or somebody else has to pay tax, or any resort has to pay tax. So we should start getting that data. I don't see why the legislature would say no to the town of Lloyd. You know, they give it to other towns. So we should start getting that data after the July legislative session.
Mark could have foiled it and gotten it faster.
Probably could have. Probably could have. It was a strange process, Scott, because I couldn't see, I mean, the county paid for it, it's their data, but for some reason, they have to do a resolution for each town to get the data. I just said I'm gonna do it and get it over with, and not fight City Hall on that one, you know. Yeah, Dave?
So I have another question, and it's perfectly coincident that Bill has arrived. One of my big points is a question that Bill brought up about whether we would allow a short-term rental in a multifamily building. Because I can see two sides of the coin. It's a dwelling unit, which means it's rentable anyway. The other side of the coin is if you have, you know, Russ's party people in a 5-unit building, now you've suddenly got 4 people who are ready to murder somebody, and we don't want to be encouraging that.
I think that, I'll be honest, they're two different things. I have apartments, I don't think that you should be doing Airbnbs out of apartments. So if it's my opinion, so, if it's an accessory apartment that's on your premises, then that's one thing. But if it's a 2-family house that, you know, that I'm renting out to somebody else, I don't think it's fair to the tenants. And I think that we, as a board, owe it to our citizens to make sure that they're protected. I don't think that that's.
Yeah, I'm kind of with you, but let me just ask a question to be a little more specific. So if you have a 2-family house that you rent out year-round as a year-round rental, you shouldn't be able to do an Airbnb. But if you have a 2-family house that you,
One of them, I would say that would be okay.
yeah, okay.
So-
That's kind of where I was. So I think
would
we're
say-
saying this, I think we're
I would
agreeing.
say, an accessory apartment is okay, or a 2-family house, that's owner occupied, so it's.
Owner on premise.
But anything over 2-family and not owner on premise can't.
Bill, you made the comment.
I just think you have certain people who have multifamilies now, who have they're all rented out, and they may want to can't come to a public hearing, I guess, then. it's
That's
safe to
okay.
say if they're not
That's
coming.
okay.
Well,
guess
you know,
the other-
I'll be honest, and I'm gonna, not, I can make a hell of a lot of money if I turn all my apartments houses into Airbnbs, make nightly renties out of them, and go up to the Department of Corrections and say, hey, I'll take anybody you can send.
Well, there's your
Airbnb."
limit. We
I'm
already
just
answered the
saying,
question.
but
We
so
already
that
said
you
can
wanna
only
really,
have two.
but
So
I'm
there's the-
saying,
yeah.
do you really wanna open that door? That's what these motels, and that's what these motels are doing, because if I bought a motel and I took every single room and rented it to the county, to make a heck of a lot of money, and I got kids being busted into my schools in Poughkeepsie that are homeless.
Yeah, but I
and they're
believe they
living in
would be
hotels.
long-term rentals for the most part, not short-term. Short-term's defined by a certain amount of days, broken in between, so maybe 30 days or whatever.
Yeah, I'm good with the way we had it, we talked about it. If it's owner occupied, not a normal year-round rental, I don't think we're gonna open
In the
it.
past, there was a situation on Bellevue Road. I believe her name was Donna Kelly.
Yeah.
She, there was a house next to her that had a swimming pool. The house,
Joan Kelly,
Joan Kelly,
she's our historian.
thank you.
Her and I've talked about this.
And she said they were renting the house out for, it was thousands of dollars.
Yeah.
And they had a swimming pool, and
Yeah.
now you're in a residential neighborhood, and now you're constantly having parties and bringing their friends in from the city, and it became a nuisance. And I don't think, you know, you live in a residential area, you got a home, a neighborhood, and now you're turning it into a commercial venture. I mean, that was just one situation with the Airbnb. I mean, I think we gotta think of that and see what the.
Yeah, and
Wasn't there, Mike, I remember that meeting, the person came and said they were actually renting spots in their yard to pitch tents.
Oh, that
as
was in,
Airbnb.
that
So-
was Beacon. Beacon, they were pitching tents,
So,
and they would use the house for the
Yeah,
bathroom.
and
we wanna put something in that
for that,
defines what is
theglamping.com.
a dwelling. Because what I
You
don't
rent
want
tent
is,
space.
It's
my
in there.
camper now is an Airbnb or.
Yeah, no, I think we put that in there.
Addressed in the law.
It's in the law, Joe. You can't do that.
Yeah, no camping.
No camping.
Camping
We-
is considered a short-term rental
Yeah.
situation.
I guess I'm wrong, I thought I read that multifamily was not allowed in New York State as Airbnb. There was 1 and 2 family.
In the New York State code,
I
Sal?
thought someplace in New York State law,
I didn't find that.
nobody else seems to know, so I might be wrong.
The other question I had when I was reviewing this was and I don't think there's an interest in it, I'm just questioning it. In the city, people who were rental tenants, who had a 3-bedroom apartment and 2 empty bedrooms, Airbnb and a spare room.
Right.
So there are, is this something we're not allowing it, it's only owned units?
I'm gonna be honest, in my lease, there's no subletting, so you can't do it. But I mean, do we wanna make it that tenants can't Airbnb their apartments?
Right now, it says only owners.
Well, it says only owners, yeah. I think you want to keep, I
I wanna
personally
keep it that
will
way.
keep it that way, right?
I think you're opening a big mess.
Right, because you want, the benefit should be to the property owner who's paying taxes, not to the renter who's coming up, I think. I mean, that's,
Well, the concern was people said they would have to move,
yeah,
but they couldn't.
exactly, yeah.
They couldn't they'd have to move, they couldn't afford the rental.
Okay.
But they can keep their apartment if they rent the room
Well,
out.
I think in that case, they have to move. That'd be my take.
I know that's an expensive apartment.
We're talking about like some different rules for different situations.
Yeah.
Regarding the size of lots and whatnot. I see there's a different situation with an owner occupied one and one that's not owner occupied.
Yeah.
So one of the things maybe we could do is, just on the application, if you're gonna have a property manager or say the owner, have a 24-hour number.
I think we have that.
Is that part of it? Okay.
Yeah, that's in here, Sal. We 100% agree. And that's why if, because if something happens, what we want to have is this application on file, so we have the number when they call Jim Jansen on the police, they know who to call. And it should be the local person that can get there. I think we put within an hour, 1 hour, person within 1 hour of the place.
Dave, one thing I'm concerned with, and I don't know if it's something we can address, is that, we have so many of these laws that your department has to go out and enforce, but they don't have enough teeth in them, or you can't enforce them. what I'm concerned is when you have an owner that's abusing it and becoming a nuisance, do we have strong enough language in there that you have the power to revoke the license?
So the only thing what I didn't build in, Joe, it's a really good question. The only thing I didn't build in were penalties for failure to comply besides the revocation of the permit. It's the
Maybe
only
we,
thing I didn't build in.
maybe we could add that in.
Yeah,
So-
I mean, we could assign any number in terms of fines.
Yeah, so if you
I
have,
don't assign fines, the judge does, but
Yeah.
once I get them to court, the
But-
judge can look at that and say,
yeah, so no, but normal, now, if we were to revoke one, so if somebody comes forward, say Joe comes forward, you know, he goes to the planning board, they do the public hearing, and they give him a license, right? And, you know, Lenny's his neighbor, Mike's his neighbor, they're calling all the time with complaints, and the complaints, they call, you know, get logged and go somewhere. I guess the question would be, what would we suggest, or at what point would we suggest we take Joe's permit away, as an example? You know what I'm saying? I think that's what you're saying. How do you revoke it?
Well, what I'm thinking is that, because the courts are backed up, you know, I know when I do an eviction, it takes me 3 months just to get in court. So if you have somebody that's abusing this Airbnb and it's becoming a nuisance to their neighbors, they're not, you know, and that's if the tenant doesn't appeal it and say, I can't make it, ask for a different night. So what I'm concerned is if that's the process to revoke it, we gotta go to court to revoke it, that you're
probably do.
subject under this permit, when you apply, we have some language, we talk to our lawyers, that I am agreeing by applying for this permit that the building department has the right to suspend it until, and I will not be able to operate until I have a proceeding through a board. So if it takes 6 months to get to the thing, they can't do Airbnb for 6 months.
yeah, that's not a terrible idea. The good part about the way our zoning code enforcement works is that it's $100 per day per violation. So even if it does take me 3 months, you know, that's 120 days at $100 a pop from the date of the violation until it gets to court and gets adjudicated.
I'm thinking, Dave, your nightly fee is the fine. So if you're charging $70 a night for your Airbnb, that's what your fine is. If you're charging $1,000 a night, then I guess that's what your fine is.
I don't think we can
But
impose.
that-
Yeah, I don't think you oppose that, yeah.
Yeah, and that, like, on my Airbnb, the rates go anywhere from 300 a night to 600 a night, depends.
I guess we're getting a nice little fine from you.
No fine.
Dave, you may get those 2 guys, you might get 3 extra guys.
Well, he's in Lake Placid now.
It's seasonal, it's midweek, it's if you
So-
book far in advance, so there's no set night. I mean, it changes.
See, I like the idea of, and maybe we can talk to Sean about this. I do like the idea is if you violate it, or,
Flat fee fine.
well, a flat fee, we can't impose the fines, though, John, the court does. I'd like to keep it some way, I'd like to be able to revoke the permit without going to court. That's what I'd like to be able to do, and I guess,
Well, would you do it immediately, or would you do it at the end of the 1 year?
I think you do it immediately if you get violations. Scott?
Can I,
But-
can I, can I say something here?
Sure.
There's a degree
Hi,
of-
Carl.
Yeah, thank you for recognizing. Shouldn't it be a degree of violations? I mean, if you have parking, say, 3 spaces and you have 1 more car,
Yeah.
maybe that doesn't qualify
Right,
as a
right,
violation.
right.
But if you have the party like you're talking
Yeah.
about, 100 people at a B&B, then maybe that should warrant a a
Yeah,
fuller
I guess the
permit.
question is, who,
So maybe we should outline that in the code.
but see, I don't want to be overly restricted to code, so I guess my question would be, who other than a judge could make that subjective judgment, right?
Well,
Because,
My thing,
go
Dave, I
ahead.
just wanna interrupt, and I hear you, and Carl, I don't think it's fair if the guy has 100 people, the guy doing Airbnb is the guy having the party. My problem is if every week there's people with 100 people, and that's telling me that the guy that has the Airbnb isn't screening his people correctly.
Right.
And that's not fair to the neighbor. So
Jerry, you,
that's-
when Joe's done.
I think
But that
basically
may
how we
need to be inserted into the code in order to make it so a judge can make a decision. So the violations may need to be itemized. I mean,
You know, I'll have to look that through, if you could talk about, they name them all, but there could be a severity trigger
That could be.
multiple incidences of complaints.
Yeah,
But again, the way the code is written, we do an investigation, once the complaint comes in, like we do with all the other
Right.
complaints. And if we have multiple stack up, maybe that's the trigger.
You know,
But
you
as
know,
Joe-
what you can do too, are you thinking, give them a points value, extra horror point. Noise violation, 10 points. 100 people, and when you hit so many points, it triggers revocation of your permit.
I think that, they'll see, some of the point, though, if you say you can only hold, like you have 3 bedrooms and you have 100 people there, I think you ought to automatically take it.
That would be the 100 point, you get the
Well,
100, right?
But Jerry, you had something, I'll let Jerry talk.
Police department, you know, if it's a bad enough violation, the police are called. Noise, garbage,
Right.
fights,
Yeah, that could
any
be.
of that stuff, alcohol, anything related.
That could be.
Now it's documented through your police department.
But
That-
to Joe, your point, we have a lot of rules, a lot of them, we don't have teeth. So you get to the point, you revoke the permit. I say, you know what? I'll keep renting. Where's the teeth then? What,
Yeah, where is the
what,
teeth then?
where do you do that?
Actually,
Say, you
Airbnb
know
will
what?
probably cancel their subscription,
Yeah.
they're pretty good that way. Airbnb.
Okay.
If there's a violation, you just contact them and notice.
Then it's a violation of the zoning code, again. It'd be a violation of not having a permit.
Right.
Originally, it'd be a
Okay.
violation of this section, and it'd be a violation of chapter 100,
But-
the separate quarter.
Which is okay, because then you could take them to, so you can revoke it, and, I mean, they're not gonna sue the town to get their permit back. I mean,
No, I don't think you can over a special
yeah,
permit.
I don't think they can either,
Probably
so.
not.
So I think, I like, we should come up with some language of what we do to revoke the permit. I think it's a good discussion. I thought about it, Joe, and I just didn't know the right answer. But I'm kind of with you on it, I just don't know yet how to,
Yeah.
okay, good,
I have a question.
yeah.
So do we have a rough idea how many of these there are?
No, that's what I want to get the data for.
Are these
Yeah.
gonna recur every 2 years?
Yeah.
And the planning board's gonna handle all of them?
No, but, no, once you apply, the second time you don't have to go back to
Yeah,
planning
if you're clean, you just renew.
board. You just renew.
So then.
So you get the fire inspection every year.
If you get violations, you have to go back to the planning, it's been revoked. So
If it's been revoked, you probably a time period before you can go back.
Yeah, I think we had the permits run January 1 to December 31.
Yeah.
So, I guess you could, I mean, I would also put a note, you could apply anytime, so if you apply in September, it's good until the following year, yada, yada. But I think that if you, maybe to Sal's point, if you do get revoked, maybe there's a 1-year cooling off
Yeah,
or
yeah.
something.
Or maybe the planning board gets all that information when you go back to reapply, that's sort of what I'm thinking.
Well, you should have it, yeah, you definitely would get it, yeah.
Or not, you know,
Yeah.
reduced or something.
No, I agree. Okay. Any other comments on this, that somebody wants to, yeah, left.
Do we have any type of requirements for background checks? And the reason why I mention this, years ago, and I think some of the board members might remember this scenario, one of our neighbors, I mean, he basically carved up his house, what was originally a 4-bedroom into, 11 or 12 bedrooms. I mean, he literally carved out, I think, even a piece of his kitchen, called it a bedroom. There was a summer where first of all, he admitted he did no background checks whatsoever. He introduced in a family-friendly neighborhood convicted felons, I think ex-prostitutes, drug dealers, and Callaway police, state police was being called for various reasons almost on a daily basis. And, I mean, things have definitely quieted down since then, but, it just,
Yeah,
brought back a lot of memories here about what occurred.
I don't know I would want to put the background checks in our zoning code. We're talking about zoning code here.
That would be up to the landlord.
Yeah, that would be up to the landlord, right, what they want to do when they rent it to somebody. Now, I know Airbnb might do some level, but very minimal. But I would think that where it would be to the rental agency or the renter or whoever.
I don't have a clue who's coming in. Airbnb, they do not do background checks. I'm with VRBO, HomeAway,
Yeah.
and
None of them do it, though.
no, if your credit card is good, you're good.
You're gonna know how bad they were by the amount of phone calls the police get.
Yeah.
No, but
While they're
You
looking.
know,
But the difference is-
my housekeeper calls and said, these
Yeah,
people
but there's a
this."
difference, like, I have a good friend that does Airbnb, and he makes sure that he checks the person's ratings before he rents it. And if you don't have good ratings, you don't
Yeah,
get it.
there are ratings on
And-
Airbnb, yeah,
and-
absolutely.
A friend of mine, I'm not gonna say
I
who,
forgot
was in
about
another town, he was renting his house out, and lady called and rented it, it was really, and he checked the ratings, they had no ratings, she was renting it for the kids, and they threw a graduation party. There was thousands of people there, the house got destroyed, the furniture ended up smashed, it was a disaster.
That happened in Highland too. I know of another person in Highland too.
Actually, in Hunt Park.
Yeah. But I think it's, you're right, they do, you are as an Airbnb rental person, you are able to rate your renters on Airbnb, so that is one
And
one
that's
step.
why I'm okay
Yeah.
with the penalty, because if you're an Airbnb person and you're having, what you said, parties and perhaps some fights, then you're not being responsible, and you should, your permit should be revoked.
So let us take some of this input, and Dave and I'll go back through it and talk through it. If you have any more, send it to us via email, because it's 5:45, I'd want to get two things. One, I want to make sure we hit the other topic, because it's kind of new to us, and we've been getting requests for them. And I personally didn't even think about it, or wasn't even sure how or what to do with it, and I also want to give you a chance to get pizza when we're done, so before the other meeting starts. So I want to make sure we end at 6:30 so we can clear it for that. The other topic I'll let Dave start talking about, which is tiny houses. Okay, and there's been people requesting to put tiny, the 400 square foot things at different places in the town.
Like a shed.
Yeah, and yeah, it's kind of an interesting perspective, because you say, well, is that really a problem if they put a tiny house on a quarter-acre lot and they have the proper Board of Health? But if you think about it, if you have two houses on a quarter-acre lot that are maybe $400,000 or $500,000 houses, and you put a tiny house in the middle of them, the valuation may cause problems throughout the neighborhood. So that's one issue, but I think there's some others. And so why don't you, Dave, introduce what you and I have had a little bit of discussion on it. I think it's an interesting topic, because a lot of towns are struggling with it right now.
Yeah, so we've actually fielded several requests for a tiny house. Where can I put them, in the town of Lloyd? They act like a single-family dwelling. In fact, the residential code of New York State now has an appendix for tiny houses. The caveat is the appendix in the residential code only changes certain elements of the rest of the code, but the tiny house still has to comply with the majority of the rest of the code, including things like protection for utilities. So you're going to need a slab. It's got to be insulated. New York State now is a very aggressive insulation program. So tiny houses are real. People want to drive them into the lot and leave them on the wheels like a mobile home. Some of them talk about putting them on slabs. All well and good, but then they realize, well, I have to comply with the energy code in New York State, which is a bear and hard to fit in the small box that is the tiny home, and still have living space inside. So we did some research. Anthony in my office and I have been talking about this for a long time, because we've seen a lot of people requesting. No one has no one has come in and actually applied for one yet, but there've been a lot of people asking. Back to the camping thing, some people have asked if they could do like a little community, a la, I don't know, I can't even think of it, like a trailer park, where they would have instead of mobile homes, they would have tiny houses, so there'd be a cluster. Some towns actually allow clusters. In fact, I have a code here that talks about tiny house and tiny house clusters. I'll get to that in a second. Most of the other towns' regulations talk about minimum square footage. Most of them run around 600 square feet or less, and that is what triggers the tiny house sort of designation on them. Other towns don't allow them as primary dwellings. Right? They can only be accessory dwellings. So if you're going to have a tiny house in some towns, you have a principal dwelling on the lot, and the tiny house becomes the accessory apartment, right? Which would fit in our town because it has the 650 square foot or less number, but you still have to make sure that in our code that the tiny house looks like the principal house and all the other elements that go along with accessory apartments. So long story short, Dave and I have talked. The question is for you all, because I do think there needs to be some regulation in our zoning for it, because right now they could go anywhere. If it complies with the New York State residential code, they can go anywhere that a single-family dwelling is allowed. There's been some discussion on that relative to whether people believe that tiny houses will bring down the value of homes around them. So if you have a 20-acre lot in the ag zone where you allowed a single-family dwelling and you put a tiny house in the middle of it, people believe that the value for the neighborhood around it decreases because now you've got this big lot.
Can I just ask you a question?
Yeah.
They would only be able to put the tiny house, or they would be able to put the
They
tiny?
would only, right now in our code, they'd only be able to put a single-family dwelling, the one tiny house.
But they couldn't come back and then make that the accessory?
Well, I suppose they could. It'd be more difficult to go the other way, start from the accessory and move up to the single-family. That would be,
For a point of clarity, if it's got wheels, that's considered a trailer, and we don't allow trailers, correct?
so that's true. That's exactly right. So the question,
It's actually kind of funny, Joe, because when we were doing some research on this, I was reading code from the tiny house manufacturers, and they were telling people the way to get around the zoning code is to put it on wheels and park it in somebody's driveway, right? So it's kind of funny how they all, you know, they know this thing is coming, and the manufacturers are trying to help people get around the zoning code because they want to sell, obviously want to sell them, right? So it's kind of unique, but go ahead, David.
yeah, so the other end of that is, suppose you've got this tiny house that comes in on wheels, and you take it off the wheels and you put it on a foundation, a slab, that's frost protected, yada, yada, and it's in a R1 quarter zone. Now you've got a 600 square foot house, or even a 450 square foot house, which is probably the minimum buildable size in the residential code, for, you know, minimum square footage for different types of habitable rooms. You've got that house, 450 square foot, next to a 1,600 square foot house, which is next to a 2,000 square foot house in our quarter zone. Those people who are not the tiny house folk are going to go crazy.
Yeah, I mean, it's a
With
character
fear.
neighborhood thing in a
Right.
sense, right?
Right.
I mean,
Because it's only 1.5 stories.
Yeah.
The tiny house is only 1.5 stories. The second story, the half story, is the sleeping area.
Right.
A little ladder. The residential code says 17 inches wide is the ladder. That's this wide. And that's your access to the second floor. How they got around the egress thing is beyond me, but that's what it is in the code. So I suggested to Dave the other day that one of the concerns that I keep hearing about tiny houses is the size impacting value. And one of the ways to kind of regulate, one of the other issues is that if we did clusters anywhere, which is what sort of the up-and-coming thing is, people want to put a bunch of little tiny houses somewhere on a lot, like in the ag zone or up in the mountain someplace, we have to wrestle with water and sewer. And the town board knows intimately right now that having private water and sewer facilities in town can be problematic. Right, you guys are wrestling with that right now in a real-world situation, not just a proposed one. Yep.
I've got mixed feelings about it. Like, if you go up to Yogi, it's a campground, they have tons of tiny houses, and they rent them out. And if somebody wanted to do a campground on one of the farms, I would be okay with that.
Me too.
yeah, me too.
That's exactly where I'm going next.
Yeah.
So if it's part of a regulated community, like a campground or some sort of manufactured home park, right? We have some in town. We have zoning for manufactured home parks in town. You could put them there. In fact, I've seen these being incorporated into what we traditionally used to call trailer parks. Manufactured home parks is what we call them, as alternatives to buying a mobile home, right? And they're sort of incorporated right into the community. So you've already got water, you've already got sewer, you've got. Go ahead, I'm sorry.
No, that's okay. Some of them are actually pretty neat, but see, that goes back also, Joe, to when we talk about outlawing private package plants, because that would affect somebody doing a
But
campground.
a private package plant, there's a difference. So for me, at a campground having a private package plant, it's okay because it's a campground.
Yeah.
It's not where it's a homeowner, I'm buying a house, like we're dealing with this well thing right now over on Sharon, and now I don't realize it's privatized and it fails, or I'm at the mercy of this guy charging me.
Basically one owner.
Yeah, Dave and I had this conversation earlier. In
So
fact,
I'm
Dave
not
brought it up
for
to me.
And I'd like to talk to the boards here about that, if you wouldn't mind.
Go,
because
go ahead.
We have the public forum, because
Yeah.
I have my own views on it, but I'd like to hear your guys' views as we go into the vote, because, you know, I'm one position, I'd like to hear your ideas.
Could this be like a secondary home, like they're gonna live here 365, or it's.
It could be anything, right? Because
Maybe if they don't, if it's not a full-time house, or
It could be a short-term rental.
Airbnb now.
Scenario, well, basically,
It could be.
if the water fails and the sewer fails, we're not on the hook because you can go back
Oh.
to your primary house.
Right, so that's the conversation that Dave and I had earlier, that if it is, because I think Dave, you and Dave are on the same page about the package plant, having it for, a single owner of the package plant rather than, in a manufactured community.
Right.
Right, so a homeowner association is no good, but a single owner is.
Yeah, so for example, and it's funny, you learn things. These developers come to me to sell me their apartments, and the new phase right now is home developments, where one guy owns all 30 houses in the development,
Right.
and he rents the houses out. And what they're saying is people can afford the monthly payment, don't have the money to put down. So if it was something like that, I might say one owner
But
owns
see,
it.
that's the good way to go, Joe, because then, if it's a single owner, a single person who owns them, the DEC can put that person under an order of consent. And that's the biggest stick the DEC has. You must comply, or we're gonna come in and do it for you, and we're gonna put it right up you. That's a big stick they have. They've done it locally, they've done it regionally. It's a big piece of meat that they can swing at you. So if it's so if they did it, so if you had like a mobile home park, a manufactured home park, or a campground, there'd be the one yogi, there'd be the one owner or corporation who would be put under order of consent. In Sharon Drive, for example, or ADC also, Falcon Ridge, all the owners, and DC's not gonna get all the owners, they're gonna come after the town. So doing it this way, as a conglomerate, one owner, is the smarter way to go.
Is there gonna be an issue, so, is there gonna be an issue if we don't allow it in a certain area? Like we say, okay, trailer, if you're gonna open a trailer, a tiny home park, or a campground, you can have it, or you can have them on its own land in this one designated area in town.
You could do that.
And this
The
would
one thing you
require
can't-
a lawsuit.
Yep, no, the one thing you can't do is you can't say to somebody, you can't have one here, because that's called exclusionary zoning, and that's the quickest route to a lawsuit. Because what you're doing is you're denying everyone the right to do that one thing. So by saying, we're gonna put them here, here, and here, and these are the regulations associated with them, and if it's a park or a campground or whatever you wanna call it, we can come up with a term for it, a cluster or whatever, having that language in the code to regulate it in terms of size, environmental impacts, all the other stuff, is how we avoid that lawsuit.
Yeah, and we have just been, I know I discussed it with Anthony when Dave was out, and Dave and I, so we haven't even tried to write anything on this one yet, because we didn't know where to go. Because the other thing I said to Dave is, I said, well, maybe, does our code have a minimum size in any zone? Like, if you had an R1 is the minimum house size defined, and it's not. So, so right now, somebody could do that. Right now, they could take a tiny home and put it on a 1 acre lot, and it might look out of place or out of character, right? So I wasn't sure whether we should go back to our current code and in our table say this is the minimum house size or living space, but I don't,
I mean, we could.
some towns do that. I'm not sure if we want to do that.
Carl's got some.
Yeah, Carl.
Has Board of Health relaxed any of the restrictions on the size of the septic systems if we don't go the package plant?
No, it's still the 49 number, so you can have up to 49 individual septics. Once you pass 50, into the 50 number and beyond, they prefer municipal connection or a package plant.
So let me ask you guys a question. Carl might be on something there. If we don't allow it anywhere there's water and sewer, you can't have them in a water and sewer district. That limits a lot of places they can.
But it also
And-
opens up a lot of R1, which is, that whole other side.
Right, and then the second thing is that they have to follow the same septic and well requirements. And then now that's gonna be more costly for you to do it. It's gotta be on a foundation. Have the square footage, I mean, I don't think the 400,
Small,
that's small.
that's small.
But the size of the septic field, you have to have the septic and a
Yep,
reserve.
that'll all be
100
calculated.
foot between the well and septic, so the building envelope shrinks quite a bit.
Right.
Well, it shouldn't shrink, it actually enlarges it, so you can only put one unit on 1 acre.
But if you did it for, say, one owner, and you're doing these tiny homes, that owner can opt to do community water, community sewer, everybody
But
But go ahead, John, you were, let John, he's been trying to say something for a while.
Right, regardless of the type of construction, tiny home, modular, whatever, your septic system is regulated by the Board of Health per bedroom. There's no bearing on what type of structure it is. And as far as, we're saying outlawing or whatever, I know this board, at least members of the board talk very highly of low-income housing and diversification. Well, this is something that a new starting family, husband, wife, they can build this, they can afford this. So if we're talking about low-income housing or more affordable housing, this may be a very good avenue for someone to get their foot in the door in town.
It may be, but that's the question, that's why the question, I think we're,
I'm gonna tell you something, and, you must have read my mind, so I'm sitting here thinking, and then you think about it, guys here, grandchildren, how many of your grandchildren or your friends no longer live here because they can't afford it? So maybe this
How many
is
of
a
our
way.
parents no longer live here?
Well, I'm sorry, my mother is 78, she shouldn't have a 4-foot ladder, but,
Right,
but you never know.
But can't afford, right?
Yeah.
So this,
oh, well, that's why we want to
Well,
make
they
sure,
say 278
we don't want to,
is-
we absolutely don't want to outlaw them. That's why we're trying to come up with what's the right way to handle them, what's the right zoning, and we have some of the good zoning minds here in this room with us, right? And, with John and the team here and some of the other guys, so that's why we're looking for input on it.
Maybe the answer is to just have the seed in their minds and then, sort of wait to do it again.
But I think,
Well, I just, my opinion is, I like both approaches. Actually, I like the idea of a minimum square footage for a house in a certain zone. I mean, it doesn't have to be
Do you have a
oppressive.
sense of what that number is? Six? 650?
No, I was
What we
thinking
do with
1,000 or
accessory
something.
apartments,
Like
right?
1,000 square feet, something like that, yeah, 1,000 square feet.
Minimum.
Minimum,
For R1
and then also this idea of putting them in a community also. I
like that, yeah.
I think those are both good ideas.
I think that is good.
Average 1,000 square foot house, what would that cost somebody to build?
It's a good question nowadays with the lumber the way it is. I'm gonna guess if it was fully compliant with the residential code, 1,000 square foot's probably gonna come in about 210.
And a tiny house at 600 feet, anybody know how much it costs?
So the ones that we researched for this discussion and other discussions that Dave and I have had, they run about $55,000 for the 450 square foot.
They're going up because the demand's going up.
The demand in the wood.
Demand's going up.
$5 a square foot.
So I mean, if you talk about Johnny's argument, to get people to afford to live here, 1,000 square foot is a big difference, 55,000 to 250.
Yeah, but see, that's why it's important, and I think Sal and I are saying the same thing a little bit. That's why it's important to say, that kind of fixes, I think, Joe, the area of where you build them and how you build them. Do you do them in clusters or do you do them on a single lot? I think that's really what we're trying to differentiate.
But what I'm concerned is, I'm really good with the trailer park. I'm really good with the campground. But what I'm afraid of is, what Dave said, if we don't allow an independent person to build one, we're opening ourselves to a lawsuit. And then, so I'm thinking we should have a designated area.
Not if it's not in our zoning.
That's why I wanted to ask, could we restrict them to?
You can,
zoning
you can, in fact,
That way we're not saying no, we're just saying it has to be here.
yeah, the conversation that Dave and I had just today was, we could regulate them exactly the way we regulate manufactured homes, trailers. Is that they're only allowed to replace another trailer with a newer trailer outside of a trailer park and only in trailer parks.
Or a new trailer park or something.
Or a new trailer park or a campground. I mean, we could regulate them and say, you can do them here. And so if you come in and you say, well, I want to do one on Brescia Boulevard or, I don't know, Mount Si Woods, you would not be able to.
So it wouldn't be mixed up with as an accessory apartment?
No, because you guys still do special use on that.
But it's 600 square foot minimum, right?
650 for maximum
The point
is the
if they
maximum.
Put that on as an accessory apartment, they could have a good argument to say, hey.
But I think that would be okay, because again, you guys have to wrestle with the special use permit piece, which includes architectural relevance to the principal building. Is it accessory use to the principal building? I'm not sure you could say that a separate dwelling unit acts like an accessory to the
Right.
principal.
The concern I have about the whole thing is not even the size, I mean, 650, whatever. My concern is the safety of that little crawl-up bedroom. Can we pass a law about that?
Well, the New York State Uniform Fire Prevention and Building Code manages that, so I'm not sure we could do anything that is less restrictive. We could do something more restrictive than that, but that's probably a year of review with the state.
More restricted means that we could say,
We could say no half story. We could say that,
I'm really,
if they accept it.
I'm not comfortable with the half story, I'll be honest with you. I think it should be
You know,
the half story.
Every time I think of that, you guys ever go camping and have that little thing up above, and that's where the kids go because it's only about this high? Yeah, well, we used to call it the hot box, because that's what they, you know. It's a loft. Yeah. Every time you sit up, you bang your melon against the roof. Yeah.
Be surprised
That's why I
though.
am this way.
When I travel a lot, some of the B&Bs I stayed in Europe, I used to get up in the morning and hit my head every day outside.
Yeah, it's a
something like that.
funny
It was-
thing. So,
Well, maybe we should just confine it to the ag district.
well, that's where I am. I'm 100% there with you.
That's the most logical place to put it.
I mean, I would say ag and trailer parks.
A trailer
The
park.
The
And in
TRs.
ag district, they can do whatever they want anyway, so that does make a lot of sense.
Yeah, I think it makes a lot of sense that way, and that may be the starting point we
And that's where
use.
we allow campgrounds.
What about
Yeah.
package plans, because that's,
And that's what-
we're gonna allow it for this this type of zoning and eliminate it for everybody
Well,
else?
the difference,
Well, no.
the difference is it's the owner is the operator.
There's only one parcel in question.
And that's what I'm concerned about with this thing is I'm gonna be honest, it's sad, you know, talking to people on Sharon Drive, they're scared. I'm scared for them. You know, that well lets go, they're gonna have issues. And we're gonna be paying the bill because the state's gonna make us.
VC will put you under order consent.
Right.
The VC will absolutely put you under
Right.
order consent.
And that's what I'm really scared about, this Falcon Ridge package ban. It ain't gonna affect any of us. It's 60 years from now is when it's gonna affect.
If they build.
I'm not in favor of package plans number one.
Well, we've gone on record as a town board saying we aren't either, and we will again tonight, but.
But what I'm upset with is, do we as, you know, we're told that we can just say no, now we're being told we just can't say no. Do we as a town board say, screw it, we ain't allowing it, sue us if you want, and let the chips blow as a wall, this is what we stand for.
Well, Joe, you have a good example for any of that. Like, if you can actually set yourself up, say no, stand your ground, and if anyone ever argues with you, say, well, the future of putting one at, whatever we'll call A site, you can go back to the previous site of Sharon Drive and say, this is the perfect reason why we don't want to do it. Look at where we're headed down with that.
And that's
You
what
have
happened,
that
I'm a,
example. You
I'm
have
a
that
strong
example.
no. I wanna say tonight at the board meeting, close it, vote no. And I'm being told that that's not the smartest thing to do tonight in the interest of our town.
Talk about the actual law.
I mean, as you guys, what do you think we should do as a board? I mean, you're the one that has to deal with this stuff.
Maybe they could know that you guys tonight are gonna send it back to them with comments that you think that there might be significant environmental impacts related to traffic, sewer, visual impact, and encouraging you to do a full type 1, full environmental impact review, an EIS. Which is that big thing.
Which will take some time to get through, and money.
What happens when they get through it? So it takes them a year and a half to get through it. Do we get a package plan?
No, you guys get to decide at the end.
We get to decide,
Well, if I get to decide then, and this is what I'm asking you guys, if I get to decide a year and a half from now, then what's the difference? I just decide now, and then they come and the argument is, you made me spend $1 million on this, and now you're telling me no?
but I think we have a better chance of winning that than outlawing them throughout the community. That's my take on it. I could be wrong about that, but from what I've asked, and I've asked a lot of questions.
They want the package plant because they want the conservation subdivision.
Exactly.
Now, they don't have the conservation subdivision,
Say no on that.
so,
Well, that's not exactly 100%. So they want the conservation subdivision to allow them to build less infrastructure,
Right.
right? Not for the package plan.
but they don't have that approval.
They do not. They don't have anything.
And if we say no, they're stuck with their 1 acre lots.
They
That's
are,
correct.
and they have to either connect to a municipal system or build less than 49 or less homes.
That's right. See, the conservation
That's the key.
subdivision, we're not obligated to give to
And that's
anybody.
what's pissing me off. They're coming to us and saying, and I don't care, you can report this, I don't really give two shits. This is what pisses me off. They come to us, threaten us, and say, if you don't do this, we're gonna sue. And then they have the balls to say, oh, by the way, we want this conservational subdivision that we can really stick it up your ass some more. I mean, at what point do we say no? You know what? The answer is no, you're not getting you're not getting your friggin' package plan, and you're not getting your conservational subdivision, and be done with it.
It depends on what your merits are to say no.
Right,
Your
right.
merits for saying no for an environmental impact and saying, no, we don't want a package plant, you trip a threshold when you go above 49, you can absolutely do that.
Right.
But if the merits are to say no, just because we want to say no,
Right.
you can't do that.
Yeah.
You have to back it up.
But we're not saying no to say no, we're saying no because look at what we're dealing on Sharon Drive.
Right, but Joe, you have merit to back that up. You can say, okay, look, we
They
don't want
bought
a
it
package
R1.
plant, we're not getting
They-
you,
it's no
we're not
hardship.
giving you the conservation easement.
Right, and
That's your merit.
Right, right.
And
That-
you have teeth.
See,
You can
see,
do it.
Sharon Drive really isn't, yeah, it's a potentially similar scenario, but they don't even know if they have a problem.
But-
So we can't hang our hat on Sharon
But we
Drive
just
because
went through
Sharon
this
Drive
10
might
years
not be a
ago with
problem
Hudson
in 30
Hills.
years.
You can
Right.
absolutely do that, Joe.
but,
They don't know.
but I also think going
we're
through,
there. We have the rationale, why not to do it?
Have we taken the package plan out of the code yet?
No.
no. No. And that's kind of what,
Allowed.
And when we did, and I'm gonna tell you, when we did the moratorium, before we came out, I said to the attorney, and that's why I have a bug up my ass about this attorney, I told him I wanted that written out of the code. And he said to me, you don't need it written out of code, you can just say no. And now, we can't just say no.
But you can.
yeah, that's where I think we are.
Vote tonight to
Joe,
adopt the law.
You can, because if that's then, if they don't get
So
the
then why are we
conservation
not, then why don't we just close it and vote on the law and maybe, no? If that's the case, if we can just do that, why tonight we can't?
Because I think you're impacting more than just Falcon Ridge if you put the law in place. And I don't know that you want to do that, the same as you say, we're putting people at risk 20, 30 years. You don't know where it's going to change 20, 30 years that you want to actually have
But
a
then
law
you can always
outline.
change the law, just like the board made adaptive reuse, another board got rid of adaptive reuse, and then this board brought back adaptive reuse. So we can do the same thing with package plans. We can say no right now, and maybe 5 years from now or 10 years from now, another board will say, or this board will say, hey, you know what? We're gonna change it back.
Okay,
You know, you could do a straw poll, we're all here, we got 3 boards.
what's that going to do, Joe? I mean, it's up to the town board to decide that, Joe.
Yeah,
But I'd like to hear to me, I'd like to hear your opinion.
I haven't been in favor of it since I've been on the board,
So,
and it goes back to 2000.
But I think we're all saying, as a town board, we're not in favor of it.
so as you guys, who believes, and show of hands, if you don't wanna raise your hand, get it. Who believes the town board tonight should vote and pass the law, no package plants in the town? If you think that we should, raise your hand. I think we should.
I don't know if you should really do it tonight, but I think it should be considered in a relatively short period of time before you start
So
facing
you,
Article
but
78.
the vote tonight is gonna be, is to send it to you, back to you guys for environmental impact study.
So what you gotta do is you gotta look at the big picture here, because years ago, when the winery came to the town, their proposal was that they were gonna build a sewer treatment plant down on their property. So everybody knows that property right now is on market for
49,
46 million.
49
Almost
million.
50
It's on,
million,
it's on Loop.
But, and
Loop
there's no
something.
sewer, so, I mean,
Who's gonna eat that eventually, though?
Yeah, they want us to pay for it. Remember they kept telling
the
us?
water line they want us to run
They
down.
will, it'll always be them, yeah, for sewer, we never pay for sewer.
But it's getting close. They're almost there now.
Almost.
Almost, yeah, stuck in that.
So
Blue
you gotta
Point
look
Road
at
is
the
deep.
picture on package plants that, as far as the subdivision easement, you don't have to give them that. You don't give them that, then.
Yeah, so
See, I think we have more teeth on the conservation subdivision discussion than we do
It becomes-
on
it
the
becomes
package.
economical. It
Right.
becomes-
Exactly right.
If you stretch it out to a 1 acre, you know how much more infrastructure you need to put in?
Yeah.
So a package plant becomes moot.
Right.
They're gonna go for the our sewer.
Exactly right.
Because you trip that 49 threshold or 50
That's right.
threshold.
That's right.
And it becomes almost a moot point.
That's the way you should go.
And that'll come out in the environmental impact.
That's what should come out in the environmental impact, exactly.
When
That's,
they first came in, all right, I know, when they first came in, they wanted 166 houses. We said, if you hook up to the sewer, we'll give you 211. All right? They were gonna change the light industrial to R1, and we'll give you 211. So evidently, those additional
That's with
40
the
houses
conservation easement.
didn't pay for his sewer.
It always had to be possible.
Right. We're saying the same thing.
Right, and the people that are on one of his package plants
I
now,
got it.
ask this gentleman over here with the gray hair, if he gets calls from them.
A lot of people out there right here.
All right, which 10?
I was gonna say,
Which 10 guys with the gray hair?
That's all I can see is his
That's like
hair.
saying,
above
ask the bald guy.
Johnny, was it you?
You know what that means? That means we don't have enough young people out there. Pick a call.
You guys gotta start buying just for men.
okay, any other, one thing I didn't want to do is there any other topics that anybody from the zoning or planning board wanted to talk to us about? I always think it's important to do the two-way. So far, the agenda's been our agenda. So is there anything that, you guys want to talk to us about or bring up, or things we should be thinking about, maybe you're hearing from the planning community or the zoning communities, or anything that we should be aware of?
Where are we at with Garrity Road? Perkinsville, Garrity, the illegal house in front of the main house?
We're gonna crack open, an enforcement piece on it. We got a letter a month ago, and Paul's now redoing our order of remedy. We'll get him in court.
So what's the order of remedy gonna be?
So, on October the 9th was the deadline for him to comply with the zoning board of appeals. This is Mr. Pinelli, the whole house. He had to comply with the zoning board of appeals. It was October, we didn't expect him over the winter to plant trees. In the spring, he planted some trees, they're way in the back. Not nearly compliant with what he said he was gonna do, and he's never been to the planning board. So, Paul, right now, even as we speak, I'm talking about it these last 2 weeks, we want to make sure the local justice court understands the severity of his thumbing his nose. That's what we are. Oh, and the I don't know if everybody knows, the ZBA lawsuit, the one that was brought against the ZBA in the town over Stewart's, the ZBA and the town won that lawsuit. And if you have not read the decision, you should. It looks like we wrote it. That's how good it was.
And I think we sent that to everybody, I think, yeah. We did send it out to the town board, I know that.
I thought the survey, but I'll send it right.
Anybody else say anything? Larry?
Detached accessory apartments in the front lawn.
In the front one?
Some of them are.
Where?
The garage is in the front lawn, you give them a permit on top.
If the garage is existing in the front yard.
Yes, the garage is existing.
You mean when the garage is existing?
Mm-hmm.
Pre-existing?
It's already an accessory building, right?
The accessory apartment that we were on top of.
Yeah, I got that, but that's, in the code, is you can put accessory
And
apartment.
what in the garage? What in the public garage?
We want the existing garage.
So if it's a building's pre-existing, why wouldn't they be able to do it?
That's the Pinelli guy, too. He's saying it should be able to.
Well, the house was there first.
Yes.
Anybody else say anything? Good.
Question, what's the status or, of the Old Mariners Harbor? Get a lot of calls on that place. Is there any movement or sewer line, I know was an issue at one time. I know,
Well, the sewer line is down at the landing,
Yeah, the sewer, sewer's there now.
Right to the property line.
right to the landing
It's his
front.
responsibility to pay to bring it to us.
To bring it the rest of the way, he'd have to bring it. But right now, I know the issue we have is we want the area cleaned up, so that's what we're trying to work on that, because it's right next to a nice looking park, and
He has also received a letter,
contractor was there, to get everything under the railroad tracks. I talked to him and Richie there, he would have run the water line from where it stops and a fire hydrant down to his property and ran the sewer line from where it stops now to his property for $90,000. He said, I don't need to do it now.
Yeah, he's got an issue with the seawall, that's the biggest problem he's got right now.
That seawall, they probably didn't want to invest in it.
The seawall, that seawall, you're talking hundreds and hundreds of thousands of
Still,
dollars.
and the evaluation of the rubble.
$586,000 plus he has to fill behind it, and that price has gone up daily.
That's some real stuff on the river.
There's just nothing left. He had a regular job.
But the bottom line is, if he would have invested $90,000 at that time, he might have been able to sell that piece of property. to somebody.
Listen, the guy, when they put those seawall in for the park, I think they offered the owner of the property then some cheap amount of money to run the seawall down his property, and they said no.
That was 786, I think, for our bulkhead.
All right. Anything else? Mark. Go ahead, you're not a board member, go ahead, I'll let you ask something.
I brought it up because, I wanna bring this up because, Dave, you talked about the Brady and Finelli. There's also some bylaw